Hi, I'm Doug Leko from Antler Quilt Design. I'm here today at Fat Quarter Shop, and I am going to show you how to do left-handed binding and some tips and tricks to go along and make your binding smooth being left-handed. Come along, let's get started. So I went ahead and sewed my binding using a 2 1/4 inch strips onto the top of my quilt. I am now ready to turn it over to the back side. Being left-handed, I always like to start after a corner. I think it's personal preference as well. So I use 2 wonder clips. The first one just to kind of hold the binding in place, and the second clip and I move it along as I go. I also have my needle and thread all ready to go with a knot on the end. And being left-handed, I don't use a thimble, and I like to use the Gina Kimball in between needles. This is size 11. I prefer 11 or 10s. I also have my Presencia thread for the binding, 60 weight, black. And then I have my Dovo scissors to clip off any threads that I need to along the way. So I like to hold my hand, or my needle in place in between my fingers like this. And I will go ahead and I will bury my thread in my binding in the seam allowance. And then I work the binding over up to the stitches. When I sewed it on, so I have a nice full binding. So as you can tell, I have to give it a little help getting to the stitches. It doesn't automatically just roll past it. The stitches the binding automatically lines right up to the stitches. I'm going to hold it with my thumb in my right hand, and I'm going to hold the needle in my left hand. And I'm going to go down into the backing, and I don't go to the front, I just go to the backing and then part of the batting, and I come right up through that little edge of the binding, just right there. Pull it up, and then right where I came up on the binding, I go right back down into the backing and just a little bit of batting, and I go over just under 1/4 of an inch from where I'm going down, and then I pull my needle right back up. And again, just go down in that same hole in the edge of the binding. And I always want to make sure you don't poke through the front. And I just continue along my binding, the same method. And I just kind of help work the binding in place and hold it before I get there. And once you do a couple inches, you notice you'll have a really nice stitch that you don't even see. And it looks just as great as the front does. And then I move my wonder clip down, also repositioning my binding. And if you have a little trouble with it rolling over to the back, you can finger press your binding. I prefer that over using an iron. Again, I move my wonder clip up a couple inches before I get there, and then I also tuck with my needle the backing so it's flat, so there's no rolls of backing or batting in my binding. I prefer the hand binding because I love the way that the binding looks versus machine, and again, it's a personal preference. And I like it so that you barely can tell which side is the right and which side is the wrong side of the binding. And I also like a very full binding. And once I get to the corner, I take my wonder clip off and then I just hold it by hand. And as I approach the corner, I like to judge the distance that I have left, and that kind of determines my stitches. So I look and I have about 3/4 of an inch. I'll make sure I put in at least 3 stitches there, because I find your corners of your quilts always get a little bit more tug than the middle of your bindings. So as you can see, I'm coming up right where my seam is from my vertical, my other side. And I'm going to pull it, and I'm going to kind of make a knot right here. I just want to secure that corner. And now I like to go to my other side, turn the quilt, and I fold it over to make sure that it's going to line up perfectly in the corner. Now the fold, as you can tell, comes out right at a perfect 45-degree angle. I hold it in place and I check the front. I always want to make sure that I have a nice 90-degree corner. Then I hold it in place, and I will take a stitch right at the fold and just barely inside the fold there. And then I will go down in the middle and I will come up in my fold. I'm going to actually put a little stitch in the corner. So I came up right in the middle, and then I'm going to go right down in the crease. So as you can tell, I'm coming up right through the top, and then I'm going to go right back down. I'm just going to do another stitch right there. And when I come back to the back side, I'm going to start off about 1/8 of an inch from my corner. And then I'm going to just keep going up the next side and finish my quilt. And once I get about 1 inch away from the corner, I like to check how my corner turned out to make sure that it's perfect. And sometimes you just need to play with it and you need to just make it flat. Sometimes if you just work it with your fingers, that's all it needs. And that is how you do binding for left-handed.